The transport shuttle descended through the crimson atmosphere of Epsilon 7, its engines humming a familiar song that Thomas Brennan had heard countless times over the past 40 years. He stood outside his habitat module, watching the vessel approach with a mixture of anticipation and dread that made his weathered hands tremble. At 68 years old, Thomas had become something of a legend on this forgotten mining colony. The old terraforming engineer who had outlasted 3 generations of colonists and refused to retire to the comfort of Earth's climate-controlled cities. The shuttle landed with a gentle thud on the designated pad, kicking up clouds of rust-colored dust that settled slowly in the planet's lighter gravity. Thomas had rehearsed this moment for weeks, ever since the Interstellar Companion Program had confirmed his application had been accepted. He had been honest in his profile, perhaps too honest. He had included his real age, a recent photograph that showed every line and scar earned from decades of working in hostile environments, and a description of his isolated life on a colony that most people had forgotten existed. He had expected rejection. Instead, he received confirmation that someone had chosen him. The shuttle door opened with a hiss of pressurized air, and Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. The woman who emerged was nothing like he had imagined. Seraphine moved with a grace that seemed almost impossible in the heavier gravity that Thomas had grown accustomed to over the decades. She was Valtorian, her skin bearing the subtle iridescent quality that marked her species, shifting between shades of silver and pale blue in the harsh sunlight. Her eyes were larger than human eyes, colored a deep violet that seemed to hold galaxies within them. She appeared young by any standard, perhaps in her late 20s by human reckoning, though Thomas knew that Valtorian aging worked differently than human biology. She carried 2 cases, one large and one small, and wore a practical jumpsuit that suggested she had come prepared for work rather than leisure. As she stepped onto the colony grounds, her gaze swept across the landscape of red rock formations, scattered habitat modules, and the distant mining equipment that had fallen silent years ago when the corporation abandoned the site. Thomas watched her take in the desolation, waiting for the inevitable disappointment to register on her face. Instead, Seraphine turned toward him and smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her alien features into something achingly familiar. She walked forward, closing the distance between them with confident steps. Thomas noticed she had researched the planet. Her boots were designed for the terrain, and she carried a portable atmosphere regulator clipped to her belt, though the air on Epsilon 7 was breathable for both humans and Valtorians. "Thomas Brennan," she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that came from Valtorian vocal cords being structured differently than human ones. "Thank you for accepting my application. I know my request was unusual." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Your application? I thought I was the one who applied to the program." Seraphine set down her cases and pulled out a data tablet, showing him the screen. "The Interstellar Companion Program works both ways. You submitted a profile, yes, but I was the one who searched specifically for someone like you. Someone with experience, wisdom, and the courage to live on the edge of known space." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in years. "But why? You could have chosen someone younger, someone on a thriving colony, or even back on one of the central worlds. Why come to a dying mining outpost to be with an old man?" Seraphine reached out and touched his face, her fingers cool against his sun-damaged skin. In Valtorian culture, touching someone's face was a gesture of deep respect and trust. "Because I did not come here looking for youth or convenience, Thomas Brennan. I came looking for substance. For someone who has truly lived and survived and built something meaningful from nothing. My people value experience above all else. We believe that a person becomes more beautiful with each challenge they overcome, each scar they earn, each year they continue to grow and learn." She traced the lines around his eyes, the same lines that Thomas had stared at in the mirror that morning, seeing only evidence of his declining years. "Where I come from, we have a saying. The smoothest stone has never known the river. You have known many rivers, I think." Thomas found himself unable to speak for a moment, his throat tight with emotions he had buried for decades. Since his divorce 30 years ago, since his children had stopped answering his communications 20 years ago, since the company had abandoned the colony 15 years ago, he had convinced himself that his purpose was simply to maintain the systems and keep the terraforming equipment functional for some future generation that might never come. "Let me show you around," Thomas finally managed to say. "I should warn you, though. This place is not what anyone would call comfortable. The habitat modules are old, the equipment is older, and I am the oldest thing here." Seraphine laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Then we shall be perfectly matched. Come, show me what you have built in this wilderness." As they walked through the colony, Thomas found himself telling her stories he had not shared with anyone in years. He showed her the central habitat where he had converted 3 abandoned modules into a functional living space with a greenhouse, a workshop, and living quarters. He explained how he had modified the water reclamation system to be 3 times more efficient than the original corporate design. He took her to the edge of the terraforming zone, where the red rocks gave way to patches of genetically modified grass that could survive in the harsh conditions. "This was supposed to be temporary," Thomas said, gesturing at the small green spaces. The company planned to expand it across the entire colony site. But when the mineral surveys came back negative, they pulled out and left everything behind. "But you stayed," Seraphine observed, kneeling to touch the grass with reverence. "And you kept it alive." "Someone had to. It seemed wrong to let it all die just because the profit margin was not high enough." Seraphine stood and looked at him with those deep violet eyes. "This is why I chose you, Thomas. Not despite your age, but because of what you have done with your years. You have nurtured life in a place where others saw only failure." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Thomas why he had fallen in love with this planet in the first place, he took Seraphine to the observation dome he had built on the highest point of the colony. It was his private sanctuary, a place where he went to think and remember and sometimes to cry when the loneliness became too heavy. "I built this 5 years ago," Thomas said as they entered the transparent structure. "When I realized I might spend the rest of my life here, I wanted one beautiful place to watch the universe go by." The dome offered a 360-degree view of the landscape and sky. Above them, Epsilon 7's 2 moons were rising, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Seraphine walked to the center of the dome and slowly turned, taking in the view. "It is magnificent," she whispered. "Thomas, do you know why Valtorians seek companionship with other species?" Thomas shook his head. "Because we live too long," Seraphine said softly. "By human standards, I am young. By Valtorian standards, I am barely an adolescent. I will live for 300 years if I am fortunate. My people often become isolated because we watch younger species live and die while we remain. We seek companions who understand the weight of time, who have already learned what it means to endure." She turned to face him fully. "I read your profile 17 times before I submitted my application. I saw a man who has spent 40 years alone, nurturing life, maintaining hope, refusing to abandon what others discarded. That is not the profile of someone too old for love or companionship. That is the profile of someone who understands exactly how precious both are." Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes, something that embarrassed him. "I am not the man I was when I came here. My body aches every morning. My hands shake when I am tired. I forget things sometimes." "Good," Seraphine said, moving closer to him. "Then you are real. Then you are honest. Then you are exactly what I hoped to find." That night, Thomas prepared dinner in his small kitchen while Seraphine explored the living quarters he had prepared for her in an adjoining module. He had spent weeks making sure everything was functional and clean, though he knew the accommodations were primitive by most standards. When she returned, she had changed into more comfortable clothing and had let her hair down, the silver strands catching the light in mesmerizing ways. They ate together, sharing a meal of hydroponic vegetables and protein supplements that Thomas had learned to prepare in ways that made them almost palatable. Seraphine told him about her life on Valtoria Prime, about the pressure she had felt to follow traditional paths, about her desire to explore and experience life beyond the careful boundaries of her society. "My family did not understand," she explained. "They wanted me to bond with a Valtorian of appropriate status, to follow the expected trajectory. But I have 300 years ahead of me. I did not want to spend them all following someone else's plan." "And this?" Thomas asked, gesturing between them. "What is your plan for this?" Seraphine smiled. "I have no plan. Only hope. Hope that we might build something genuine here, something that honors both of our journeys. Is that enough?" Thomas thought about all the years he had spent alone, all the nights he had watched the stars and wondered if anyone in the universe remembered he existed. He thought about the walls he had built around his heart after too much loss and disappointment. And he thought about this remarkable woman who had traveled across the galaxy to find him, specifically him, not despite his age but because of everything those years represented. "Yes," Thomas said finally. "That is more than enough. That is everything." As they cleaned up after dinner, working side by side in the small kitchen, Thomas allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in decades. Not just hope, but possibility. The sense that perhaps his story was not over. That perhaps the best chapters were still to be written. Outside, the moons of Epsilon 7 cast their silver light across the red landscape, and in the distance, the terraforming equipment hummed its endless song of patience and persistence. The first crisis came 3 weeks after Seraphine's arrival, announced by the shrieking alarm that Thomas had hoped never to hear again. He bolted upright in his sleeping quarters, his heart hammering against his ribs as decades of training kicked in despite his age. The atmospheric processors were failing. Without them, the breathable air in the colony would degrade within 72 hours, and the terraformed sections would begin dying within a week. Thomas pulled on his worksuit and rushed to the control center, finding Seraphine already there. She had arrived at the monitors before him, her violet eyes scanning the readouts with focused intensity. She had spent the past weeks learning every system in the colony, asking endless questions and taking detailed notes. Now that knowledge was being put to the test. The primary processor is showing cascade failures in 3 separate subsystems, Seraphine reported without looking up. The backup system is trying to compensate, but it was not designed to handle full load for extended periods. Thomas moved beside her, his fingers flying across the control panel despite the arthritis that made his joints ache. This should not be happening. I ran full diagnostics 2 months ago. Everything was within acceptable parameters. Look at this, Seraphine pointed to a data stream Thomas had not checked. There is a contamination in the filtration membranes. The composition matches the dust from the recent storms we had last week. It has been building up gradually, and now it has reached critical mass. Thomas felt his stomach drop. The storms on Epsilon 7 had been getting worse over the past year, something he had attributed to natural climate variation. But if the dust composition had changed, if it was now capable of compromising the processors, then the entire colony was at risk. We need to shut down the primary processor, flush the system, and replace the membranes. But that will take at least 48 hours, and we cannot run on backup alone for that long. Seraphine studied the readouts for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the console in a rhythm that Thomas had learned meant she was thinking deeply. What if we do not try to run everything on backup? What if we reduce our atmospheric footprint by 70% and concentrate all resources on maintaining just the essential habitats? That would mean abandoning the terraform zones, Thomas said, feeling something tear inside his chest. Everything I have kept alive for 15 years would die. Seraphine turned to face him, her expression serious but compassionate. Thomas, we can rebuild the green zones. We cannot rebuild you. The choice is clear. But Thomas was already shaking his head, moving to a secondary console. There might be another way. When I first came here, before the company gave up, we had a prototype atmospheric generator in storage. It was experimental, never fully tested, but if we could get it online, it might be able to handle the load while we repair the primary processor. Where is this prototype? Seraphine asked, already moving toward the equipment lockers. In the old research facility, about 3 kilometers from here. The company sealed it when they left, but I kept the access codes. Thomas pulled up a map on the screen. The problem is getting there. The facility is on the other side of the contaminated zone, and the dust storms are still active. Seraphine studied the map, then looked at Thomas with determination in her eyes. Then we go together. You know the systems. I know the Valtorian environmental protocols that might help us adapt the prototype. We have 57 hours before backup fails completely. That gives us time, but not much. They prepared quickly, loading the colony transport with equipment and supplies. Thomas felt every one of his 68 years as he climbed into the vehicle, his back protesting and his hands struggling with the safety harness. Seraphine helped him without making it obvious, a kindness he appreciated more than he could express. The journey across the contaminated zone was treacherous. The transport sensors struggled to penetrate the thick clouds of rust-colored dust that swirled around them, and twice Thomas had to manually navigate around obstacles that appeared suddenly in their path. Seraphine sat beside him, monitoring the external conditions and calling out hazards before his aging eyes could spot them. "You should have left me behind," Thomas said after a particularly close call with a jagged rock formation. "You could have made this trip faster without an old man slowing you down." Seraphine reached over and placed her hand on his arm, the touch gentle but firm. "Thomas Brennan, stop measuring your worth by speed or youth. You are the only person in this sector who remembers this facility exists. You are the only one who knows these systems well enough to adapt them. Without you, I would be driving blind into a sandstorm with no idea what I was looking for. Your experience is not a burden. It is our greatest asset." Thomas felt warmth spread through his chest, a sensation that had nothing to do with the transport's heating system. "You have a way of making an old fool feel valuable." "You are not a fool, and I do not say things I do not mean. My people consider dishonesty to be the greatest offense. When I tell you that you are valuable, I speak truth." They reached the research facility as the worst of the storm hit, forcing them to take shelter in the transport for 6 hours while the winds howled around them. In the confined space, they talked about everything and nothing. Seraphine told him about Valtorian philosophy, about how her people believed that every being was a work in progress, constantly evolving and growing until the moment of death. Thomas shared stories from his youth, about the dreams he had held when he first came to Epsilon 7, about the family he had lost to time and distance. "Do you regret it?" Seraphine asked during a quiet moment. "Coming here, staying here, giving up so much?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "I used to. For years, I believed I had made the wrong choice, that I had wasted my life on a failed dream. But lately, especially since you arrived, I have been thinking differently. Maybe nothing is wasted if it teaches us something. Maybe every choice, good or bad, shapes us into who we need to be." "That is very Valtorian of you," Seraphine said with a smile. "We have a saying. The broken seed still grows, just in a different direction than expected." When the storm finally cleared, they entered the facility together. The interior was exactly as Thomas remembered it, frozen in time from the day the company had locked the doors. Equipment sat under protective covers, and the air smelled of disuse and abandonment. Thomas led Seraphine through the maze of corridors to the storage vault where the prototype generator waited. The device was larger than Thomas remembered, a complex assembly of filters, converters, and catalytic processors that represented the cutting edge of terraforming technology from 4 decades ago. Seraphine circled it slowly, her trained eye assessing the components. "This is brilliant," she murmured. "Primitive by current standards, but the core design is actually more elegant than modern systems. Whoever built this understood atmospheric chemistry at a fundamental level." "That would be me," Thomas admitted quietly. "I designed it when I was 28, fresh out of engineering school and convinced I could solve any problem. The company never implemented it because it was too expensive and too experimental." Seraphine turned to stare at him, her violet eyes wide. "You designed this? Thomas, this is revolutionary work. Why did you never mention this before?" Thomas shrugged, uncomfortable with the admiration in her voice. "Because it failed. The company rejected it, and I spent the next 40 years maintaining other people's systems instead of innovating my own. What is there to boast about?" Seraphine moved to stand directly in front of him, placing both hands on his shoulders. "Thomas Brennan, listen to me carefully. This did not fail. It was never given a chance to succeed. There is a profound difference. And now, 4 decades later, you get to see your creation save lives. That is not failure. That is vindication." They worked together for the next 30 hours, carefully dismantling the prototype and modifying it to work with the colony's current systems. Thomas found himself falling into a rhythm he had not experienced in years, the pure joy of creative problem-solving. Seraphine proved to be an exceptional partner, her Valtorian understanding of environmental systems complementing his human engineering instincts perfectly. During a break, As they sat surrounded by components and tools, Seraphine asked the question that had been hovering between them since the crisis began. When we get this working, when the colony is safe again, what then? Will you finally consider leaving this place? Thomas looked around the facility, at the equipment he had designed so long ago, at the woman who had traveled across the galaxy to find him. I have been thinking about that. For 15 years, I stayed because I could not bear to abandon what I had built. But maybe I was really staying because I had nowhere else to go, no reason to leave. Now I have a reason. And what is that reason? You, Thomas said simply. Wherever you want to go, whatever you want to do, I want to be part of it. If that means leaving Epsilon 7, then I am ready. For the first time in decades, I am ready to let go. Seraphine smiled, but Thomas saw something flicker in her eyes, a shadow of concern that she quickly hid. Let us save the colony first. Then we can talk about the future. They transported the modified prototype back to the colony and spent another 12 hours integrating it into the existing systems. Thomas's hands shook from exhaustion and his back screamed in protest, but he pushed through, driven by a determination he had thought long dead. When they finally activated the prototype, both of them held their breath as the systems came online. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the monitors began showing positive readings, the atmospheric quality stabilizing, the backup systems powering down to standby mode. The prototype was working, not just working but exceeding expectations, processing air more efficiently than the original system had ever managed. Thomas collapsed into a chair, every muscle in his body trembling. Seraphine knelt beside him, her cool hand on his forehead. You did it, Thomas. Your design saved us. We did it, Thomas corrected. I could never have done this without you. They sat together in the control center as dawn broke over Epsilon 7, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with exhaustion. But beneath those feelings was something else, a nagging worry about the shadow he had seen in Seraphine's eyes. Over the following week, as the colony system stabilized and life returned to normal, Thomas noticed changes in Seraphine. She became quieter, more withdrawn, spending long hours in her quarters. When he asked if something was wrong, she smiled and assured him everything was fine, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Then, on the 8th day after they had saved the colony, a message arrived from Valtoria Prime. Thomas was not meant to see it, but the colony's communication system was old and sometimes routed messages through the main control panel. He saw Seraphine's name and could not help but read the first few lines. The message was from the Valtorian High Council. They were demanding Seraphine's immediate return. Her participation in the Interstellar Companion Program had been unauthorized. Her family had filed an official grievance, claiming she had abandoned her duties and responsibilities. There were legal implications, cultural obligations, and diplomatic complications that Thomas did not fully understand but could sense were serious. That evening, when Seraphine returned from her daily walk through the terraformed zones, Thomas was waiting for her with a message displayed on the screen. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Seraphine looked at the message and her shoulders slumped. Since the day before the crisis began. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you, how to explain that my choice to come here was more complicated than I admitted. Tell me now. Tell me everything. So she did. She explained that she was not just any Valtorian citizen but the daughter of a council member, promised since childhood to bond with another council family. Her participation in the Interstellar Companion Program had been an act of rebellion, a desperate attempt to experience life on her own terms before being locked into a predetermined future. She had known the consequences would eventually catch up with her, but she had hoped for more time. I am so sorry, Thomas. I should have told you from the beginning. But I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would not accept me. That you would see me as just another spoiled rich girl running from responsibility. Thomas sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. Part of him felt betrayed by the deception, but a larger part understood exactly what had driven Seraphine to this place. To him, he had spent 40 years running from his own failures and responsibilities. Who was he to judge her for seeking the same escape? What happens if you go back? He asked finally. I will be bonded to someone I do not love, assigned to a role I did not choose, and spend the next 300 years fulfilling other people's expectations. I will be safe, comfortable, and utterly miserable. And if you stay, I will be declared outcast from my family and my people. I will lose access to Valtorian resources and support. And I will potentially cause diplomatic problems between Valtoria and the human colonies. She looked at him with desperate eyes. But I will be free. I will be here, with you, building something real instead of living a beautiful lie. Thomas stood slowly, his joints protesting, and walked to the observation window. Outside, the terraformed zones were thriving, the modified prototype humming efficiently in the background. He had spent 15 years keeping this place alive, clinging to a dream that everyone else had abandoned. And now he understood that Seraphine had been doing the same thing in her own way, holding on to hope that life could be more than what others decided it should be. He turned back to face her. I am 68 years old, Seraphine. I cannot give you 300 years. I probably cannot even give you 30. If you stay here with me, you will be giving up so much more than I could ever offer in return. Seraphine crossed the room and took his weathered hands in hers. Thomas Brennan, you still measure worth in time and youth. But I have learned something from you these past weeks. Value is not about duration. It is about depth. I would rather have 10 genuine years with you than 300 empty years following someone else's script. Your family will never forgive you. Perhaps not. But I will forgive myself, which is something I could never do if I walked away from this, from you, from the life we could build together. Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes for the second time since Seraphine had arrived. Are you certain? Really, truly certain? Because once you make this choice, there may be no going back. Seraphine smiled, and this time the expression reached her eyes, filled them with light that seemed to illuminate the entire room. I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my entire life. I came to Epsilon 7 looking for someone who understood the value of things that others had given up on. I found that person, and now I choose to stay with him, to build something beautiful in this forgotten place, to prove that the best things in life are not the ones that come easy but the ones we fight to keep. Thomas pulled her into an embrace, holding her close and marveling at how right it felt, how perfectly they fit together despite all the reasons they should not. Then we face this together. Whatever comes, we face it together. Outside, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a response was being drafted to the Valtorian High Council. But in that moment, in that small colony on the edge of known space, two people who had both been written off as too old, too young, too impractical, or too rebellious held each other and chose hope over expectation, love over duty, and possibility over certainty. The future was uncertain, potentially difficult, and definitely complicated. But it was theirs, and that made all the difference. The response from Valtoria Prime arrived 3 days later, and it was worse than either Thomas or Seraphine had anticipated. The communication came directly from the High Council, transmitted with enough official encryption that every relay station between Valtoria and Epsilon 7 would have logged its passage. This was not a private family matter anymore. It had become a diplomatic incident. Thomas stood beside Seraphine in the control center as she played the message. The council representative was an older Valtorian male whose silver skin had taken on the deeper pewter tone that indicated advanced age. His voice was cold, formal, and absolutely unyielding. Seraphine, daughter of council member Valithos, you have been declared in violation of the concordant obligations. Your unsanctioned participation in alien cultural programs and your refusal to return home have brought dishonor to your family and created complications in interspecies relations. The Human Colony Administration has been notified of your status. You have 72 hours to board the retrieval vessel being dispatched to Epsilon 7, or you will be formally exiled from Valtorian society and all protections thereof will be revoked. This is your final opportunity to correct your error. Choose wisely. The message ended abruptly, leaving only static and the sound of their breathing in the quiet room. Seraphine's hands were trembling, though her face remained calm. Thomas recognized that expression now. It was the same mask she wore when she was trying to be strong, trying not to let fear overwhelm her. They are sending a ship, she said quietly. That means they are serious. They have never dispatched retrieval vessels for simple family disputes. Thomas took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "What does exile actually mean for you? What would you lose?" Seraphine turned away from the screen, her violet eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Everything. My people do not take exile lightly. I would lose all legal standing in Valtorian society, all access to our technology and medical care, all connection to my culture and history. I would become invisible to my own people, as though I had never existed. And given that Valtorians live for 300 years, that is a very long time to be erased. But you would still be alive, still be free." "Yes, I would still be those things. But Thomas, there is more to consider." The message said they notified the Human Colony Administration. That means they contacted the territorial authority. If the authority decides that my presence here creates diplomatic complications, they could revoke your settlement rights. They could force both of us to leave Epsilon 7. Thomas felt ice forming in his stomach. They would not do that. I have maintained this colony for 40 years. I have kept the terraforming equipment operational. I have preserved everything the company abandoned. And the territorial authority values diplomatic relations with Valtoria more than they value one retired engineer on a failed mining colony. I am sorry, Thomas, but we need to be realistic about what my staying here could cost you. Before Thomas could respond, another message arrived, this one from the territorial authority itself. The official seal appeared on the screen, and Thomas felt his hands beginning to shake as he opened the communication. The message was brief and bureaucratic, the kind of impersonal language that governments used when they wanted to avoid responsibility for difficult decisions. It informed Thomas that his settlement status was under review due to complications arising from unauthorized alien immigration. A representative would arrive within the week to assess the situation. In the meantime, he was advised to avoid any actions that might further complicate interspecies relations. "They are going to take it away," Thomas said, his voice hollow. "After everything I have done, everything I have sacrificed, they are going to use you as an excuse to finally shut down this colony and reclaim the equipment." Seraphine moved to embrace him, but Thomas stepped back. Not in anger, but because he needed space to think, to process what was happening. He walked to the observation window and stared out at the landscape he knew better than any place in the universe. The terraformed zones were thriving now, green patches spreading across the red rock like hope taking root in barren soil. His prototype atmospheric generator hummed steadily in the background, proving that his 40-year-old design had been right all along. "There has to be another way," Thomas said finally. "Some option we have not considered." "There is one option," Seraphine said quietly. "I could go back." Thomas spun around to face her. "No. Absolutely not. That is not even on the table." "Thomas, listen to me. If I return to Valtoria, the diplomatic incident goes away. Your settlement rights are restored. You can continue living here, continuing your work, without any interference. You keep everything you have built. Except you. I lose you. But you keep your home, your purpose, everything you have dedicated your life to preserving." Thomas crossed the room in 3 quick strides, moving faster than he had in years despite the protests from his aging body. He took Seraphine by the shoulders, looking directly into her violet eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. I spent 40 years of my life clinging to this place because I thought it was all I had left. I convinced myself that maintaining these systems and keeping the green zones alive gave my existence meaning. But do you know what I have realized since you arrived?" Seraphine shook her head, tears now flowing freely down her iridescent cheeks. "I was wrong. This place was never my purpose. It was my prison. I stayed here because I was afraid to face the world again after all my failures. I stayed because it was easier to be alone than to risk being rejected again. But you changed that. You showed me that there is still life beyond these boundaries, still possibilities I had not imagined. So if the choice is between keeping this colony and keeping you, there is no choice at all. You are more important than any of this." "But Thomas, this is your life's work." "No," Thomas said firmly. "My life's work is still ahead of me. With you. Wherever that takes us." They held each other for a long time, neither speaking, both understanding that the easy path forward had vanished. Whatever they chose now would come with consequences, with loss, with sacrifice. But at least they would face it together. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of preparation and difficult decisions. The Valtorian retrieval vessel would arrive soon, followed shortly by the Territorial Authority representative. Thomas and Seraphine spent their time documenting everything about the colony, creating detailed records of the systems, the terraforming progress, and especially the prototype atmospheric generator that had saved them all. On the second day, as they worked side by side in the control center, an unexpected message arrived. It was from Dr. Helena Fisher, director of the Interstellar Companion Program, the same organization that had brought Thomas and Seraphine together. Mr. Brennan, Ms. Seraphine, I have been monitoring your situation with growing concern. The Interstellar Companion Program was created specifically to foster genuine connections between species, to break down the barriers that separate us. What has developed between you is exactly the kind of relationship we hoped to facilitate. I want you to know that you have the full support of this organization, and we are prepared to intervene on your behalf. The message continued, explaining that the Interstellar Companion Program had significant political influence and had already begun negotiations with both the Valtorian High Council and the Territorial Authority. Dr. Fisher was proposing a compromise that might satisfy all parties involved. The key issue, as I understand it, is that Seraphine's participation in the program was unauthorized by her family and created diplomatic complications. What if we could retroactively authorize that participation? What if the program formally requested Seraphine specifically, making her presence on Epsilon 7 an official cross-cultural initiative rather than an act of rebellion? This would give the Valtorian Council a way to save face while allowing Seraphine to remain with you legally. Thomas and Seraphine looked at each other, hardly daring to hope. Would that actually work? Seraphine asked. There is only one way to find out, Thomas replied. We need to document everything we have accomplished together. Show them that our relationship has real value, not just for us but for interspecies understanding. They spent the next day preparing their case, creating a comprehensive report that detailed their collaborative work saving the colony, the innovations they had developed together, and the potential for future cooperation between human and Valtorian communities. Thomas included detailed specifications for his prototype atmospheric generator, offering to share the design freely with both human and Valtorian colonies. When the Valtorian retrieval vessel arrived on the third day, Thomas and Seraphine stood together on the landing pad, holding hands and prepared to face whatever came next. The vessel was impressive, sleek and elegant in the way all Valtorian technology seemed to be, decorated with the flowing symbols that represented the High Council. The hatch opened, and 3 Valtorians emerged. Thomas recognized the older male from the initial message, but there were 2 others as well, younger council representatives who moved with authority. They approached with formal bearing, their expressions unreadable. Seraphine, daughter of Valithos, the older Valtorian began. You have caused your family and your people considerable distress. I understand that, Council Member Therax, and I apologize for the manner in which I departed. But I cannot apologize for the choice itself. Therax studied her for a long moment, then turned his attention to Thomas. You are the human engineer, Thomas Brennan, the one who has maintained this colony alone for 15 years. I am, Thomas confirmed, standing as straight as his aging back would allow. Your prototype atmospheric system is quite remarkable. I have reviewed the specifications you submitted to the Interstellar Companion Program. The design principles are sound, elegant even. My people could benefit from such technology. Thomas felt Seraphine's hand tighten around his. The design is freely available to anyone who wants it, Council Member, including your people. All I ask in return is that Seraphine be allowed to remain here with me, if that is her choice. Therax's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. The Interstellar Companion Program has made a compelling argument on your behalf. They have proposed designating this colony as an official cross-cultural research station, with you both as co-directors. Such a designation would satisfy the concordant obligations by giving Seraphine's presence here official purpose. It would also satisfy human colonial authorities by transforming this from an abandoned mining site to an active diplomatic outpost. And my family? Seraphine asked quietly. Your father is not pleased, Therax admitted. But he is a pragmatist. He understands that forcing you to return against your will would accomplish nothing. He has agreed to accept this compromise, provided you maintain regular communication and uphold the dignity of our people in your work here. Seraphine felt tears flowing again, but these were tears of relief rather than fear. I will do everything in my power to honor my people and my family, council member. I promise you that. Therax nodded, then did something unexpected. He approached Thomas and extended his hand in the human gesture of respect. Take care of her, Thomas Brennan. She is more precious than I think even she realizes.